Yoso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Swakato Yena Bhagavata Dhammo Supatipanno Yassa Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Tangmayang Bhagavantang Sadhammang Sasanghang Ime hi sakare hi atharaham aropite hi abhipujayama sadhuno bhante bhagava suchira parinibhutopi Pachima janatanu manasa ime sakare dukkatapanakara bhute patiganhatu amhakam bhigaratang hitaya sukhaya Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantam Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Andamayang Buddhasa Bhagavato Pubabhaganamakarang Karomase Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa We'll do about 30 minutes of meditation. Diptiji will set the timer.
Dhamma chaloka dhipati sahampati Katanjali anu tivarang ayachatha Santi dhasatta parjakha jatika Dese tu dhammang anukampimang bhajam.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang gunuttarang upajjayang namasami. So it's nice to be back again and have another session. So the chant that Deepthi chanted is traditionally offered as a request to a monk or a nun to offer their reflections. So the story goes that the Buddha had attained enlightenment, and his first thought was, this knowledge that had arisen within him was something so subtle. And he was quite concerned as to how he's going to convey this message to people. So his first inclination was to go and lead the life of a recluse. And the Brahma Sahampati, through his powers of intuition, got to know that these were the thoughts of the Buddha, of the fully enlightened one, perfectly enlightened one. So he comes down, realizing the rarity of this occurrence, comes down to him, and with folded arms, he says, there are people who will benefit from your teachings. So please, out of compassion, stay with us and teach us. So it's traditionally used as an invitation for someone to share the Dhamma. And the reason I kind of bring this up is because earlier, few of us were meeting and having tea and discussing the Dhamma. And one of the questions that came up was, with so many spiritual traditions, so many spiritual paths available, what is the specialty of the Buddha Dhamma? What sets the Buddha Dharma apart? Or in other words, why are we all attracted to the Buddha Dharma? Because unlike people born in Thailand or Sri Lanka or Burma, for various reasons, we have not been born into a Buddhist culture. We were all born into different spiritual cultures, and now we've come together because we see a lot of value in the teachings of the Buddha. So I thought it'll be nice to explore a few facets about it and share what motivated me to commit to this path of Dhamma Vinaya. So again, this concept of Dharma and Vinaya that we call Dhamma Vinaya, Dharma in Sanskrit, Dhamma in Prakrit Pali, is a dual, it's a compounded word that actually encapsulates the teachings of the Buddha. So the Buddha taught, all of his teachings about various topics are called suttas, and they are encapsulated as the Sutta Pitaka, and that is called the Dhamma. And in general, he laid down guidelines of conduct for the monastic community, which are the monks and the nuns, and that is available in the Vinaya Pitaka, and that is called the Vinaya. So it's usually translated as the teachings and the discipline. The way I look at it is Dharma is the truth and Vinaya is the transformation. So as a monastic, we have certain guidelines and rules by which we live, and this influences how we interact with people, how we are able to move from place to place, how we eat, how we dress, and a whole variety of things that ensures a certain standard of conduct. When the standard of conduct is adhered to, it adds a lot of refinement to the life we live and the way we do things. So we don't interact like lay people do between monastics, or even between monastics and lay people. There are certain etiquettes and courtesies that are followed all the time. So that's why I call it transformation, because it transforms the individual, transforms the way the individual views the world. And the Vinaya becomes the conduct of individuals, then becomes the vehicle through which the Dhamma is realized. So the truth is realized. And this I found extremely fascinating, because the Buddha is at his deathbed. Then Ananda comes to him and says, who is to succeed you? So, you're passing away. Who's to lead the Sangha? And the Buddha says, it's the Dhamma and the Vinaya who will be your teachers. Very much like how, Guru Nanak said that the Guru Granth Sahib would be the Guru for future generations. So it's the idea that it is a set of values and a set of guidelines and a set of teachings that we would have to personalize for ourselves, that we can use for our own internal transformation, which will then be our guides. So it's a huge responsibility, right? So I thought that was something really fascinating and something worth investigating, something worth committing at least part of this lifetime to. So that was a huge motivation. The other thing is, in Buddhism, the Buddha's teachings are always about investigation. Come and find the truth for yourself. So it is not something that he says and something we have to believe in. So the idea of blind faith is not present in Buddhism at all. Wherever there is commitment or faith or belief, it's always accompanied by investigation and by wisdom. So he says how a goldsmith tests the purity of gold. That's how a practitioner should test the validity of the teaching. And that shows not just immense humility from this great personage, the Buddha, but it's also very practical. Then it makes it easy for people to follow. So there's no kind of, this is exactly the way you do it, this is not the way you do it. But I try it out and I see that, yeah, this works. And because it works, it holds a certain value, it holds a certain appeal. And in turn, it deepens one's commitment, it deepens one's resolve, and one is really inspired to go deeper and deeper into the teachings, personalize it to different situations, to different circumstances, and really apply it in day-to-day life and see its efficacy. And the efficacy is easy to ascertain. It's not something that, sure, it will give a lot of benefit in the next life or in the afterlife or however you want to call it. But here and now, the benefits can be seen. And the other idea in Buddhism is that I found very appealing is that there's no idea of sin. Right? The word sin is not used. There's punya and papa. Punya is wholesome, skillful activity. Papa is unwholesome, unskillful activity. The law of karma operates through that. So if our actions are skillful and wholesome, the results that follow will be skillful and wholesome, and vice versa. So then this becomes a life that is led through wisdom and investigation, rather than something that is imposed on us through fear or through temptation. So the general thing is, oh, if you follow this, then you will get, you'll be reborn in Swarga, or you'll get this really high rebirth, you'll be reborn as a Deva. If you don't do this, you'll go down to the hell realms, and all of these descriptions of Naraka are given, and etc., etc. Whereas the Buddha's teachings are plain, very, very down to earth. Wholesome and unwholesome, you see the effects here and now. Sure, there will be effects to follow in the afterlives or future lives as well. But however you see it, the responsibility and the onus falls within us. It's a very empowering teaching. So it's difficult to locate a scapegoat. It's difficult to say, oh, this happened because of something else. No, you can, if you get angry and you lose your cool, you know what the reason is. The reason is in here, it's not out there. So it becomes very empowering, very accessible, easy to understand, easy to apply. In fact, this was one thing I heard in Ajahn Amaro's talk, and then I looked it up. So apparently there was a BBC interview of King Rama IX, the previous King Majesty, King of Thailand. And the BBC interviewer asked him, what's the difference between Christianity and Buddhism? So His Majesty Bhumibol said, in Christianity, you have the concept of original sin, whereas in Buddhism, we have a concept of original purity. And it's so true, because our very natures, the nature of humanity is purity. Then that gets obscured by conditioning and things around, and desire, and everything that we call kilesas and sankharas and asavas. All of these things come and tinge the existing purity that's there. So these were some of the things that actually drew me to Buddhism, made me commit to it. But at the same time, the idea of sila, the idea of living life virtuously, is not really emphasized much in other religions as clearly as it's emphasized in Buddhism. So the first thing is, when you take on the idea of sila, you start with the 5 precepts. And these are the precepts, and these are called sikkhapadas, training steps. Sikkha is training, pada is step. So then what happens is, when you commit to say, I undertake the training to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. I undertake the training not to steal, so on and so forth. It is a recognition that, yes, I'm trying. I have to practice. I have to commit to this. I'm not perfect. I'm here to learn. So instantly there is that feeling of humility, and at the same time a sense of guilt is removed. So if by chance something goes wrong, and we do fall off the wagon at times, if that happens, then there's no immediate weight of guilt that comes and crushes us. So the guilt of doing something wrong. So it's easy to say, okay, sorry, I made a mistake. I'll make sure I don't do it again. So it's a very gentle, patient way in which effort is applied. And then, of course, because it is a training step. We see the difficulties in applying that to our own lives. And then you can also see it in others. Okay, if I find it hard to do a certain thing in a certain way, somebody else might find it equally hard to do things in a certain way. So then what happens is that compassion arises. There's a lot more acceptance. The ability to see transgressions in a different way rather than in a very judgmental manner arises. So these are all great, very, very skillful ways of approaching training and approaching the way we live our lives. And like all our great teachers say, that these precepts, when we keep them, it's actually a gift that we give to the people around us. So Sila and Chaga. So Chaga in Pali is Tyag in Hindi, Tyaga in Sanskrit. So it's the idea of Tyaga is not some heroic, great thing of sacrifice. In essence, it's a very simple thing. Is, I put myself next. I put you before me. So having consideration for the other person, having consideration for the group, having consideration for a set of values, rather than always looking at what I want to do, how I want to do it, what needs to be done, how should people come and talk to me, what can I get out of this situation, what can I get from that interaction. All that is avoided. And this idea of tyag can actually manifest in the way we interact with everyone, in the way we live our lives. And hence, this kind of, there's a lot of refinement and beauty that can come into the way we live lives, to the way we interact, the way our whole life can be an offering. So it removes a lot of selfishness, removes a lot of unpleasantness. And so these are, this kind of approach, I didn't find with so much of clarity in some of the other traditions that I encountered. And so these are things that attracted me, and taking it a step further, His Holiness the Dalai Lama would always say, if you follow the teachings of the Buddha, it'll make a Christian a better Christian, a Hindu a better Hindu, a Muslim a better Muslim, right? So the way I look at the Dhamma Vinaya is that it brings in a lot of humaneness, a lot of human values in us. Sure, it's a religion. Sure, there's culture attached to it. Sure, there is a lot of other things that, that every religion has, Buddhism has as well. But in its core, it's this idea of leading a life where there's always something greater and better and bigger in front of you. Right? So that was, of course, the refrain. All of this can again lead to this. Oh, I'm a Buddhist, and that sense of pride can easily arise. And that's something to be very careful about, because in the teachings of the Buddha, he constantly keeps saying that, this set of beliefs, this set of teachings are there for you to make yourself better. Do not denigrate the teachings of others. Do not look down on other traditions. The idea of not holding to fixed views, right? That's another very precious thing that we find very often in Buddhism, because it's when one has a view and that view is fixed, then the immediate what immediately follows is that there is an opposing view, and that opposing view is equally fixed. So then there's conflict, right? And so Lumpucha's teachings of Meine, it's uncertain. is such a deep and precious teaching that's applied by all our great teachers and comes from directly from the teachings of the Buddha, that, there's no point in having a fixed view. There must be flexibility. There must be the recognition that things are totally interconnected. One small thing that happens here can affect something else that happens there. And to have the humility to say, yeah, who knows? Just like Darsab was saying this afternoon, who knows? It may bring about a good result. We don't know for sure. The Buddha himself says that. Right? So it is this kind of recognition that we do live in a world that's fraught. We do live in a world that's uncertain. And within these constraints, we try and do our best. And if it so happens that there might be a slight transgression here or there, then what is important is recognizing it and making sure it doesn't happen again and moving on. So these were, as a result of tea time, I thought just bring this out and recognize that, Aranya Vihar Trust is, there's the Amarama here and Sangarama is going to come in the near future. So in an area where it operates, we were discussing about how Kurukshetra is such a holy place, I mean, of course, it's holy for the Hindus because that's where the Mahabharata battle was fought and the Bhagavad Gita was preached there. But it's a holy site for the Buddhists because the Mahasatipatthana Sutta was preached there. It's a place of pilgrimage for the Jains. So, there's a lot of history and a lot of information behind that. Right? And to always be respectful of everything that's around us. So thought I'd just share this with you. And if there's any questions, be glad to answer. Yes, I think somebody has a question.
Thank you, Bhante. So my question is related to this uncertainty that Ajahn says, like in everything it's like there is uncertainty, but sometimes when mind keeps on ruminating on that and again, for every situation or every decision you're going to make, and there are challenging situations, then if you keep on focusing on that, sometimes it brings a lot of worry and anxiety associated with it. So my question is how to reflect on uncertainty, but also dissociate it from the anxiety and the worry that comes along with it. Because for everything we keep on thinking about uncertain, we can always be in a state of fear all the time.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the teaching of that, things are uncertain, maine, is not a teaching that should be applied in relationship to proliferation. It is a mere recognition that things can go either way. So if that leads one to proliferating, to worry, to anxiety, then it actually loses its point. The point is not to not to engage in that proliferation in the first place, but just to recognize that yes, things are like this now, but it could change at a dime. It could change very quickly, right? So yeah, if that proliferation comes about, then probably shift your focus or shift your attention to something else. Probably do a little bit of walking or do a little bit of chanting or anything. Take a, like, even if it's not walking meditation, just go out and take a walk. But yeah, the idea of uncertainty is a reality. So it's a recognition of that reality rather than something that should be taking you to proliferation and anxiety and worry.
I just wanted to give instruction to the online people that who are attending online, they can also raise their hand or put the question in the chat box.
Yeah, so till we get any question online from online friends. So when you said Dhamma Vinaya, I always try and translate it into, let's say, my life or our lives as lay people. So if you could elaborate a little bit on when you say Vinaya as in a bhikkhu life or a monastic life, but how do we translate it for ourselves as lay people?
So again, Vinaya is just a certain format by which we lead our lives as bhikkhus. So we have the Patimokkha and we have the rules and we have the Vinaya Pitaka, and that's what informs us about how we live our lives. So for the lay people, the prescription is the precepts. So it is an analysis. First of all, it's an understanding of why the precepts exist. And having understood it, then internalizing it and applying it in day-to-day life would then become the Vinaya of a layperson. There are also many suttas which describe what is wholesome living, what is unwholesome living. The Noble Eightfold Path, where there's Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva. So all of these are common, right speech, right action, right livelihood. So all these are common, not just for the monastic community, but also for the lay community. So these then form the body of Vinaya that lay people can adopt and apply to their day-to-day lives.
Another question that I have is, this is based on a previous talk that you gave this morning that was about awareness, and you were talking about awareness as a container to hold all the sensory experience and objects and so on. So my question is that, in the forest tradition, we hear a lot about reflection and investigation and applying your mind. You've been talking about applying attention. Same time also, in some sense, if we have to talk about maybe reflecting and analyzing also to some extent. I know that, we don't want to stick to words, but one of the, there's always that demarcation or a very soft boundary between whether I'm proliferating and analyzing to an extent of proliferation versus really investigating. So my question is one that, maybe I have got two questions. One is that with awareness, where we say, having sati and seeing things as they are, then where is the role for investigation and reflection? And two is that, maybe we want to take one at a time. Okay. I'll come to the second.
Sure. So sati is, in a sense, mindfulness, seeing things as it is. But in order to see things as it is and to understand things as they are, it needs a certain reflection, it needs a certain level of understanding, it needs a certain level of comprehension, right? It is only when sati is missing that reflection and comprehension and understanding are missing. It is because we tend to follow our immediate, instant habit patterns, and we react as we've been reacting ever since we've been born and the way we've been conditioned by society. So that's when sati is actually missing. So when sati is missing, there is also a delusion, there's no clarity. But then when there is sati, right, in order to see something as it is, you have to understand it. You have to. So preceding that would definitely be a kind of comprehension, a kind of reflection, even if it's not, what's the word I'm looking for? Even if it's not something that is immediately discernible, it is always part of the process. So I don't see how you can have mindfulness without having a level of comprehension and without having a level of clarity. So all these are, they're all part of the same process. It would be my understanding of that. You had another question.
Yeah, maybe a little bit background to my previous question also, that, we've spent, let's say, several years maybe in practice where we were looking at the breath or sensations and becoming aware and mindful of the breath and sensations. And with the understanding that, don't bother too much about what it is, where is it coming from, and so on. So that's kind of gotten instilled in a way that observing is enough and reflecting is a deviation of sorts. So that's a little background to what I was trying to say.
Okay, then, yeah, that adds a lot more clarity to the question. I would say, okay, so you observe, and then what? If let's say I'm observing something, it can't just be observation. The observation must lead somewhere. And where it should lead to is an understanding and reflection. And because of that reflection and because of that investigation, the ability to see things as clearly as possible and the ability to see things as they are. If it's just observation alone, then I don't see the point of it. I don't see the value in it. Now, there has to be Dhamma Vichaya, investigating, understanding, that has to be consistent throughout.
That helps. So when one takes to that now, reflecting and understanding, then the question is of extremes now, sometimes
Yes.
we get into that over analysis and
Yes.
all. So if you could share some thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have a kind of benchmark that I keep to myself. Like if I'm trying to understand something and I have an intellectual process going on, if it gets too confusing and if I have to go through it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and I'm getting further away in my understanding, then I make myself stop, right? And I do something else, probably go to the breath or go to sensations or shift my attention to something else, and then take up the investigation at a later point. Because the moment it gets into proliferation, then, it's a kind of a spiral. You go round and round and round, and it becomes difficult to stop. Just like Sumrit's question about, recognizing that things are uncertain and taking it to the level of proliferation whereby fear arises and anxiety arises. That's exactly what we are trying to stop. So this kind of over-analysis, overthinking leads to more confusion rather than to clarity. So when I see that happening within me, I immediately kind of either put a stop to it, in the sense, get up and go somewhere, do something else. Or if I'm meditating and this is happening as part of my meditation, shift my attention to something else that's coming up in awareness.
Okay, Pandit, there is one online question.
Okay.
By Smita and Sanil. They are asking, my question is how one should look at the social philosophy of Buddhism.
Social philosophy of Buddhism. I'm not clear as to what that means. What is meant by social philosophy?
If Smita and Sanit is there, you can unmute and you can directly ask, please. If you could elaborate more on your question, Smita and Sanil.
Can I speak?
Yes.
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just regarding, especially in Indian context, Buddhism addressed social inequalities. Of course, it is not social, it's political. Social and political, of course, it has connections. So do you think that earlier we had a time where state patronage was there in the context of Buddhism? Now we are in a totally market-oriented, very individualist kind of a world. In addition to that, of course, social inequalities also proliferate. So what is the relevance? I'm not sure whether it is making any sense. What is the relevance of Buddhism in such a context? Or whether it has to offer any kind of a social larger vision and so on. So that's my submission. Thank you.
Great. That's a very interesting question. There's a lot to it. There's a lot one can say about it. But just looking at history, when the Buddha was teaching, he had all kinds of people going to him and wanting to become his students. You had Brahmins, you had Kshatriyas, there were many Vaishyas, there were people from the Shudra community and from other communities who wanted to go and learn from him. So the brilliant thing he did was, he said that caste and your birth, your status by birth, has absolutely no place in the Sangha. So if there is a person who's ordained before you, right, then that person becomes senior to you. That's it. Regardless of your birth, your social standing, regardless of the other person's birth, their social standing. In fact, there's a very interesting story. The Buddha's cousin and a group of his relatives go and they want to ordain. And along with them, the family Baba, Upali, goes and wants to ordain at the same time. And Upali says, oh, you're all people of noble birth, so please go and ordain before me. Buddha says, no, you've come here before them. So you ordain first. So Upali is actually ordained first. And the Buddha's cousin and his relatives are all ordained after that, right? So that's a brilliant way of breaking a kind of thought pattern, a social pattern that existed then. I think it's very, very relevant even today. There's no caste-based distinctions in Buddhism at all, whether it's in Sri Lanka or Thailand, whether it's Theravada or Mahayana or Vajrayana, whether it's in lay life or whether it's in monastic life, none of those things are a big consideration. In today's market-driven economy, I think the biggest contribution that Buddhism can make is its total focus on how greed arises, right? So when you look at the Buddha's first teaching, he talks about suffering, and he talks about the cause of suffering being greed, right? So this understanding of greed, understanding the mechanism of how grasping works, understanding the mechanism of how tanha, trishna, how that works, all these are core and central to the teachings of the Buddha. So in that sense, it can definitely address a lot of inequalities, economical inequalities that we find in society today. And just because the Buddha enjoyed royal patronage at that time, I don't think it really skewed his teachings in any way as to benefit his patrons. His teaching was fairly consistent throughout, and to all, applicable to all. And it's purely because of that universality that his teaching is so relevant today. So does that kind of answer your question? Or?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. Yes, Samrit. I think maybe use that one.
My question is, like, when in life you are faced with situations where the things are ambiguous, there's no right or wrong, and you have to take some decision where either it's difficult to outweigh the pros and cons of that decision you make, where things are ambiguous, and your mind is reflecting on, if you do this, then this is the worst scenario that can happen. So you're trying to prepare, but at the same time, there's some remnant of your mind which doesn't want that worst thing to happen. So in that present moment, you're trying to be prepared for the worst scenario to happen. But when it happens, then I feel like I'm not prepared. I was not prepared enough, So how do you deal with this dilemma? Like, because in life, there are things when there is no set, like there's no Shila involved there. You're following the precepts to your best extent, but things are very hazy or ambiguous. They're not by the books. So, but trying to prepare for the worst, but there's so much, you still don't want that worst to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically what you're saying is you don't want the worst to happen, but when the worst happens, you feel you haven't adequately prepared for that. Yeah, there's, they say with hindsight, vision is always 20/20. So you'll have perfect vision in hindsight. And that's very true, because whatever happens in life, you try your best and you do things to the best of your ability, really committed to taking a good decision, a proper decision. And then if the outcome is still not as good as you hoped it would be, then obviously you recollect and you think, okay, these are the things that I could have done better to avoid this kind of outcome. So that becomes an opportunity for learning. Rather than getting dejected by saying, oh, I could have been prepared and I could have done X, Y, and Z to get this particular outcome. You have to be realistic and say, okay, I tried my best. The outcome is not what I expected it to be, but this is what I've learned out of this whole exercise. That becomes the foundation from which you can take your decisions in future. So a failure, that's why failures in life are always stepping stones to success. The mistakes you make now can actually be your teachers to avoid mistakes in future. So instead of getting overly critical and beating yourself up by saying, oh, I wasn't prepared, I think it's wiser to say, okay, this is what happened, and this is what I can learn from it so that it doesn't happen in future. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but sometimes these things can have a very big impact.
Yeah.
So like sometimes, yeah, it's important to learn from those mistakes, but that is gone. So sometimes some golden opportunities are just gone out of your hands. So then, there is more thing comes into play. Oh, I'm not going to get this opportunity again. So I have thought about all those things, like, I could have done this situation better, or maybe I've already thought about it, but I didn't do it, but I took it in a different way. But then these things come up, I already thought about doing those things, but I didn't do it. So, and I lost that opportunity. So then that guilt and regret steps in.
Right.
So.
And so are you asking as to how you can avoid the guilt and the regret, or what's your question?
Both that thing also, but like you start questioning, your decision, and you start feeling, okay, I thought about those things could happen, but still why I didn't take that decision, and I just lost.
That's what I mean. So that's where you're beating yourself up, right? If everyone could make the perfect decision all the time, the world will be a perfect place. But the reality is we are not able to come to the right decision each and every time. The reality is, even if we do try and come to the best decision, there may be so many circumstances, situations around us that might not allow that thing to manifest the way we want it to manifest, right? Buddha Dhamma has a lovely saying, trust in God, trust in Allah, but tie your camel. So, you have to have trust, you have to have faith, you have to have belief, but at the same time, you must also be practical, and to whatever extent you can, make sure you secure all of these improbables. But life has so many improbables that it's impossible to secure all of them. So the best we can do is try and learn from them, and at the same time, very important not to beat oneself up about it. And again, going back to this uncertainty. So at this point in time, it may feel that you've lost a golden opportunity, but it may happen that because you've lost this golden opportunity, it might translate into something better in future. One never knows. Even that is uncertain, right? So have a positive outlook and try not to be, this I'm saying because we've had these interactions before, and you've attended so many of the Zoom sessions back at the Sarana. So have a positive outlook and try not to be so judgmental and hard on yourself. Okay, so
Bhante,
yes.
so I think this is a technical question.
Okay.
So is there any difference between feeling and sensation?
No, it's a fair question. So when people use the word, I think it depends on how people use it as well. So sensation, the way I understand it, is things that we feel in the body. It's a little more physical, it's a little more tangible. The word feeling can be used in an emotional sense as well. So it's not just a prick in my thigh or an itch in my shoulder, but it could be a feeling of sadness, it could be a feeling of grief. So feeling is used in both ways. It could be a physical thing or an emotional thing. Whereas sensation, I think, is, especially in the way it's used in Goenkaji's teachings and in that tradition, it's more a physical thing. Okay, so it's 8:24. So maybe, oh, okay, there's an online question.
An online question, again by Smita and Salil.
Okay.
They're asking, I would like to know about Buddhist understanding on humility.
Humility.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's a central concept in Buddhism. I would suggest reading the Metta Sutta that's available online, reading a good translation. So if they went to Amaravati's monastery and looked up the translation of the Metta Sutta in their chanting book, that's a very nice translation. But yeah, humility is definitely central. As everything that we do, when we bow to the shrine, when we bow to elders, everything that we do instills a sense of humility within us. So without humility as a key factor, nothing can be recognized. If even to say that I'm suffering, there has to be a level of humility. If there's no humility to recognize that, then you don't even take the first step on the path. So I'd say, yeah, look up the Metta Sutta and read from there. So I think now is a good time. Darsahab requested some Parita chanting. So Payal, probably while we are doing the Parita chanting, if you focus just on the shrine, then it'll be good for people online to. Okay. Paritvanametaṃ sameta bhadanta avikita chitta paritaṃ bhanantu sammanta chakkavalesu atra gacchantu devata saddhammang munirajassa sunantu saggamokkadaṃ Sagge kame charupe girisikara thathe chamtalikhe vimane Deeperate chagamme taruvanagahane gehavattum hi khethe Bhumma chayantu deva jalatala visame yakhaganda banaga Titham ta samtikeyang munivaravachanang sadhavo me sunamtu Dhamma savana kalo ayang bhadanta Dhamma savana kalo ayang bhadanta Dhamma savana kalo ayang bhadanta Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa Dhassa namota sa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa namota sa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa buddhang saranang gacchami dhammang saranang gacchami sanghang saranang gacchami dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Yo chakkumamo hamalapakato samang babuddho sugato vimuto marasapasa vinimochayanto pape sikhemang janatang vinayang buddhang varamtang sirasa namami lokasanatham cha vinayakan chatam tejasa tejaya siddhi hotu sabbam taraya cha vinasamem tu dhammo dhajoyo piyata sasatu dase siloka savisuddhi magang niyani dhammadhara sadhari sattavaho samtikaro suchinno dhammang varamtang sirasa namami mohapadalang upasamtadaham tam tejasa tejaya siddhi hotu sabbam taraya cha vinasamem tu saddhammasena sugatanugoyo loka sapapu pakile sajeta samto sayam samtiniyo jako cha savakata dhammang viditang karoti sanghang varamtang sirasa namami buddhanu buddhang samasila ditthim tam tejasa te jaya siddhi hotu sabbam taraya cha vinasamentu. Asevana cha balanang panditanam cha sevana puja cha pujaniyanang etang mangalamuttamang patirupadesavaso cha pubbe cha kata punyata attha samma panidi cha etang mangalamuttamang bahu Sancha Sippan cha vinayo cha susikkito subhasita cha yavacha etam mangalamuttamang mata pitu pathanang puttadara sasangaho anakula cha kammamta etang mangalamuttamang danam cha dhammacharya च ज्ञातकानं च संगहो अनवजानि कम्माणि एतं मंगलमुत्तमं आरति विरति पाप मज्जपाणा च संयमो अपमादो च धम्मे सुएतं मंगलमुत्तमं गारवो च निवातो च संतुष्टेन कथं युता कालेन धम्म सवणं एतं मंगलमुत्तमं खन्ति च सो वचस्सता समणानं च दस्सनं कालेन धम्म साकच्च एतं मंगलमुत्तमं तपो च ब्रह्मचर्यं च आर्यसच्चानदस्सनं निब्बाणसच्च किरिया च एतं मंगलमुत्तमं पुट्ठस्सलोकदं मे हि चित्तं यस्सनकम्पति अशोकं विरजं खेमं एतं मंगलमुत्तमं एतादृशानि कत्वान सबद्धमपराजिता सबद्धसोत्थिं गच्छन्ति तं तेषां मंगलमुत्तमं ते यं किञ्चिवित्तं इदबाहुरं वासगे सुवायं रतनं पणीतं ननो समङ्गति तथागतेन इदं पिबुद्धे रतनं पणीतं एतेन सच्चेन सुवत्ति होतु खयं विरागं अमतं पणीतं यदज्जगा साक्यमुनि समाहितो न तेन धम्मेन समत्ति किंचि इदं पिदं मे रतनं पणीतं एतेन सच्चे न सुवत्ति होतु यं बुद्धसेठो परिवन् न शुचिं समाधिमानं तरिकन् यमाहु समाधिना तेन समो न विज्जति इदं पिदं मे रतनं पणीतं एतेन सच्चे न सुवत्ति होतु ये पुग्गला अट्ठशतं पसत्ता चत्तारि एता नियुगानि होन्ति ते दक्षिणैया सुगतस्स सावकायेते सुदिन्ना निमहफलानिदम्पि संघे रतनं पणीतं एतेन सच्चे न सुवत्ति होतु ये सुपयुक्ता मनसा दर्ढेन निक्कामिनो गौतम शासनं हिते पट्टिपत्ता अमतं विघाय लद्धा मुदा निभृतिं भुञ्जमाणा इदम्पि संगे रतनं पणीतं एतेन सच्चेन सुवत्ति होतु क्षीणं पुराणं नवं अतिसम्भवं विरतचित्तायति के भवस्मिन् ते क्षीणबीजा अविरुल्हि चन्दानि भन्ति धीरा यतायं प्रदीपो इदम्पि संगे रतनं पणीतं एतेन सच्चेन सुवत्ति होतु मेत्तं च सब्बलोकस्मिन् मानसं भावये अपरिमाणं ऊर्ध्वं अधोचतिर्यं च असंभादं अवेरं असपट्टं Tanjaram nisinno va sayano va yavatasa vigatamidho etang sating aditteya brahmametang viharang idamahudittincha anupagamma silava dasanena sampanno kamesu vinay yagedang nahi jatu gabhaseyang punareti Bojhango sati sankhato dhammanang vichayo tata viriyang piti passadhi bojanga cha tata pare samadupekha bojanga sattete sabbadassina munina sammadakkhata bhavita bahuli kata samvattanti abhinyaya nibbānaya ca bodhiya etena saccavajjena suttite hotu sabbada ekasamiṃ samayena-tho moggalanam ca kassapaṃ gilane dukkhite disava Bhojange sattade saite chatang abhinamditva rogamuccing sutang karne etena saccavajjena suttite hotu sabbada ekada dhammaraja pigelam yena bipilito chundate rena tamye vabhana petvana sadarang sammoditva cha abada tanha vuttasi thanaso etena saccavajjena suttite hotu sabbada pahinate cha abada tinnanang pimahesinang maggahata kilesa vapattanu patti dhammatang etena saccavajje na suttite hotu sabbada Dukkha pattha ca niddukha bhaya pattha ca nibbhaya soka pattha ca nissoka homtu sabbepi panino etavata ca amhehi sambhatang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodam tu sabba sampatti siddhya danam dadantu saddhaya silang rakhantu sabbada bhavana birata hontu gacchantu devatagata sabbe buddha balapatha pachekanam chayang balang araham tanam cha tejena rakhang bandami sabbaso Jayanto bodhiyamule sakyanang nandivadhano evang tavang vijayo hohi jayassu jayamangale aparajita pallankhe sise pathavi pokhare abhisekhe sabba buddhanang agapato pamodati sunakhatang sumangalang suphabhatang suhuttithang sukhano sumuhutto cha suyitang brahmachari supadakhinang kaya kammang vacha kammang padakhinang mano kammang panidite padakkhina padakkhinaanikat vanalabham tatte padakkhine Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhamtu sabba devata sabba buddhanu bhavena sada sutti bhavantu te bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhamtu sabba devata sabba dhammanu bhavena sada Sutti bhavantu te bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhamtu sabba devata sabba sanghanu bhavena sada sutti bhavantu te. Okay. Great. Let's pay homage to the shrine and call it a night. Whoever's here tomorrow, see you tomorrow. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Three bows to our teachers.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhantaji.
Thank you.